We're good. Hello, everybody. How you doing? I have a couple of announcements following the SSCC meeting last week. We appreciate the feedback. Thank you very much. One of the comments were about getting answers in the reading activities, and the answer is no. The reason we're not providing answers in the reading activities is that we have 11 activities. They each have 30 questions, and we repeat them over semesters. That would mean we need to create 300 questions every semester if we gave you the answers, and we don't have the resources, the man or woman power, or the will to do that. So that's not going to happen. However, you do get a report of the answers that you missed at the end of the test. And what you could do, well, already to know that the answer you pick was wrong gives you some information, so you can go back and read in the book and try and find the right answer. And if you can't find it, what you could do is to take a screenshot and come and see us in office hours, or maybe post a private link on Piazza. It's very important. Do not post screenshots with answers on Piazza, because we don't want to reveal answers to other students. So if you ask us privately, we'll be happy to try and help you figuring out the right answers. So that will be the way to go about it. The second one is about having more regular due dates for the reading activities. Actually, in the first semester, all reading activities were due just about, it was a week before the final, and students didn't like that because they wanted more regular. So this semester, I moved it to having the first 6 chapters due midterm and the last 5 due at the end. But seemingly, people would still like more regular, so we'll take that on board. We can't change it at this point because it's too late in the semester. We can't just change semester together. Some of the slides that I use are probably traced back to slides that you produced some years ago, so thank you for that. He's also basically...
That's called plagiarism.
No, because he gave them to me via intermediate people.
Intermediate people? The chain of testimony seems very suspicious.
Yes. It's conspiratorial. Matthew is also basically the national expert on conspiracy theory. You might have seen him on TV talking for or against conspiracy theories, or just illuminating us on what's going on with all these topics. He's just about to publish a book on the topic very soon, and he's also on a quest to go to Miami and trying to raise money for that, so maybe you'll be tempted to help him out. Are you going to talk about that?
Well, I wasn't going to, but now I feel like I kind of should. Although then there's something that makes this guest lecture appear to be a large advertorial, and that is either great or suspicious, depending on how you take advertorials to be.
So in any case, you got the ultimate experts to learn about conspiracy theory, so I leave you in good hands, and I'll see you on Thursday with further topics for the course.
Excellent. Nice shoes.
You like?
Yeah. Very nice. We should chat about those shoes later. Yeah, well done. Okay, everybody. Yes, my name is Matthew Dentith. I am an internationally recognised expert when it comes to discussion of conspiracy theories, which always strikes me as being one of the most ridiculous things in the world. The notion that you have an expert on conspiracy theories is one thing. In fact, that expert is me is another thing entirely. Let's start off by talking about that election that's just been. Although I am aware that talking about the election to a group of undergrads at the University of Auckland is actually a pretty weird thing to do. Just for the sheer fact that you are part of the cohort which is least representative in our electoral system, because you are part of the cohort which is the least likely to vote of anyone within the system. So some of you might be going, there was an election. Some of you might be going, yes, there was an election, and I did mean to vote, but I never got around to it. Some of you might be going, I don't know what's in it for me if I vote in an election, which is why I didn't vote in an election. And some of you will be going, well, I damn well voted in an election, and don't cast aspersions upon my character just because all the people around me didn't vote. Although I'm also going to assume that because you're PHIL105 students and you're interested in critical thinking, that you are politically engaged. And thus are reading the papers every day, or at least reading the online news, checking Twitter and such like, and we're aware of just how conspiratorial our last election turned out to be. Because in the run-up to polling day, we had a huge amount of claims of conspiracy about both the left and the right in Aotearoa, New Zealand. And basically it all boils down to a discussion of these two characters up here. You've got Cam Slater and Nikki Hager. Cam Slater famously writes and curates the whale oil blog, is taken to be an attack blogger for the National Party of New Zealand, and has engaged in, if you believe Nikki Hager, the other gentleman up here on the slide, engaged in a large amount of conspiracy, either with the explicit approval of the National Party, or at least the implicit approval of people within the Prime Minister's office, to run black op campaigns to basically destabilise the left and also suppress the vote as much as possible. Now, that is a conspiracy theory. That's a theory about a conspiracy being operated by members of the blogosphere on the right, with maybe the allegiance of people in the top echelons of government. And many people who are enamoured of the right have gone, well, look, this sounds like a vapid conspiracy theory. This seems like the kind of conspiracy theory that's put forward by the left whenever they think they're about to lose an election, and thus they don't want to blame their incompetence and their constant infighting. No, they want to blame the National Party. They want to blame good old John Key. And so they will go, well, look, this Nikki Hager fella, he's a journalist with a well-known left-wing agenda. He always tends to write books that come out just before an election and hoping of swaying an election. It's obviously a vast left-wing smear campaign designed to make the right look as bad as possible. And the media's complicity in raising questions raised by dirty politics, that's part of a large-scale conspiracy by elements on the left who want to destabilise our government. And it turns out no matter what you believed about Cam Slater or Nikki Hager, or the theses they propounded about the electoral system in Aotearoa, you basically, as a voter, had to then make a decision. Do I accept that what Nikki Hager is saying is true, which casts aspersions upon the National Party and their lackeys, which to a certain extent means that I've now got to go, I was going to cast a vote for National Act or United Future, but now I'm not so sure? Or do you accept the assurances of the Prime Minister, Stephen Joyce, Bill English and co., that actually Nikki Hager's engaged in a smear campaign and go, look, this just shows you how ill-prepared the left is for governance this time round, so maybe I'll change my vote with that respect. So as a voter, you had to have an opinion to a certain extent as to what to make of these rival conspiracy theories in our electoral system. And I'm assuming, as good 105 citizens who are politically engaged and also liable to vote, that when you went to the polling booth on polling day, you had in mind some of the arguments that were being tossed about by the left and the right about the allegations we found in dirty politics. Now, some of you will be thinking, well, hold on. All this talk about conspiracy theories is a bit odd. We're just presenting two people with two rival conspiracy theories as if conspiracy theories are perfectly normal things that come up in political conversation all the time. Surely, when we talk about conspiracy theories, we're talking about something in a much more interesting and slightly nefarious fashion. We're talking about theories that claim the Illuminati or the Freemasons, the secret power behind all world governments, who have designed the system in such a way that they always win and we always lose, and possibly have some nefarious endgame in mind. Or maybe when you think about conspiracy theories, you think about theories about, well, you know, who was really behind 9/11? I mean, some people claim it was an organization called Al-Qaeda, masterminded by an individual called Osama bin Laden. But surely bringing down the Twin Towers is such a magnificent achievement. You can't really imagine a terrorist organization operating in the back blocks of Saudi Arabia or Afghanistan being able to do it. So maybe there was some other force involved. Maybe the US government ran it as a false flag campaign. I mean, shouldn't we consider these hypotheses seriously? Maybe you think of theories like David Icke and his claim that the world is controlled by alien shape-shifting reptiles. The alien shape-shifting reptiles have a variety of endgames. They want to drink our blood, they want to eat our children, and they want to use their psychic vampiric abilities to divest us of all emotion and thus imprison us in a prison planet of grey monotony. And there are people who believe in these particular hypotheses. David Icke, who's a former British football star, former British journalist, now travels around the world giving lectures to packed out audiences, giving 9 or 10-hour lectures on how the alien shape-shifting reptiles are our true masters. And I say masters here because, by and large, Icke does talk about them as being a male-dominated patriarchy which controls us behind the scenes using their reptilian powers. David Icke was out in New Zealand, I think 5 or 6 years ago. He gave a lecture, it was 9 hours long, out at the Manukau Event Stadium, and 800 people from Auckland turned up. So, whilst this is a fringe view, it's a fringe view where you probably know someone who has actually attended a David Icke talk or read one of David Icke's books. It's a major conspiracy theory. Or you might go for a slightly more sensible conspiracy theory. Maybe you've got questions about whether anthropogenic climate change is really happening. Maybe the UN, NIWA, world government and such like, they're conspiring with old-style communism, dressed up as the environmental movement, to make us feel guilty about our luxurious Western lifestyles in order to bring in laws which will curb our excesses and thus rob us of our individual liberty. Or maybe you think that actually it's not the climate change, I'm about to say approvers, that seems entirely wrong, the people who are supportive of the science behind climate change. Maybe it's the organisations which are in denial about climate change. Maybe it's ExxonMobil, BP and such like, the big oil companies who are conspiring with the media to make us think that maybe climate change isn't the big thing it's meant to be. Maybe that's the kind of conspiracy theories you think of. Or maybe it's all about those moon landings. Were they faked? Were they real? Did we really actually go up to the moon? Why have we not gone back? And these are the kind of things that people think about when they think about conspiracy theories. And my work in the philosophy of conspiracy theories is trying to challenge whether these are the right kind of examples to think about, whilst also asking, are we rightfully able to dismiss conspiracy theories out of hand as a general class of belief, or do we have to consider that actually sometimes we've got to analyse conspiracy theories on their merits? And my task today, as your guest lecturer, is to go through why I think we have to look at individual conspiracy theories on their merits and why there's very little progress to be had by simply dismissing belief in conspiracy theories out of hand. But let's move on to another issue. Most people don't like being called conspiracy theorists. So many people will start a sentence with, I'm not a conspiracy theorist, but, and you can pretty much guarantee if someone says, I'm not a conspiracy theorist, but, that the very next thing they're going to say is a conspiracy theory. In the same respect, if you say, I'm not racist, but, the most likely thing you're about to say next is something which is incredibly racist. You just don't want anyone to call you a racist to say it. The same is true if someone says, I'm not sexist, I'm not transphobic, I don't hate gay people. Almost everything they're about to say after that is going to be an example of the thing they're claiming not to be. I think the only way to get around with this is that I'm not racist, I just happen to like saying I'm not racist. Probably the only way you can get away with saying I'm not X. So I'm not a conspiracy theorist, I just like saying I'm not a conspiracy theorist. And that's not a particularly satisfying utterance. But some people do like being called conspiracy. Oh, that's Noam Chomsky, for those of you who don't recognise his bespectacled visage here. He quite famously, in the field of study about claims of conspiracy, claims that most conspiracy theories are actually better understood as examples of institutional problems in large organisations. So he'll look at examples. This example is really, really quite old now. Possibly none of you remember the great Microsoft antitrust settlements of the early 90s, because they were quite some time ago, and some of you may not have even been born at the time that I'm actually thinking of. But famously, in the 90s, Microsoft was being sued by various corporations all around America for denying people access to the APIs that run the Microsoft Windows operating system. So the claim was Microsoft was conspiring against small developers to lock them out of the Microsoft ecosystem, so consumers would only buy Microsoft-branded products. And Microsoft's response to this was actually quite fascinating. They said, yes, it's a problem. But it's not a conspiracy. Microsoft is such a large organization that every single time that someone rings up and says, hey, I want to talk to someone who works in the API system that deals with file saving requesters, because I want to build an app that uses the file saving requester in the Windows system. They'd get a call line, and the person on the phone would say, yeah, this is Dave here. No, you need to speak to Jeff. I'll put you on to Jeff, and then Jeff would pick up the phone and say, why did Dave send you to me? I know nothing about what you're talking about. You need to talk with Sal. Sal will be able to sort this out. And then Sal goes, no, you need to talk with Dave. Oh, so Dave doesn't know about this? Have you talked with Jeff? Oh, not Jeff. All right, I'll give you to Pierce. Pierce will help you out. And 3 months later, the small developer basically gives up at that point, going, well, look, there's obviously a conspiracy operating here because no one wants to tell me anything. And Microsoft said, yes, this stuff happens, but it's not a conspiracy. We just really, really badly managed. A function of an organization this big, we just don't know what's going on in our own organization. We have people working for us that we don't know what they do. And they exist only to sit behind phones and pass calls on to one person or another. So we recommend we radically restructure our organization. And there's no conspiracy. Now, of course, any conspiracy theorist worth their salt will then go, well, that's precisely what they want you to believe. Of course, Microsoft is conspiring against a small developer. But of course, also, they've got an excuse as to why they're not conspiring. They've got this big fictitious story about being badly organized. But no, really, it's a conspiracy. They just happen to know a way of getting out of the claim they are conspiring. And Chomsky runs that particular type of analysis. He goes, look, most conspiracies are actually just big organizations not functioning properly. They may look conspiratorial, but actually that's not the case. But you contrast that with someone like this. This is Kristen Hitchens, now deceased, famous raconteur and writer for Slate, Salon, and other media organizations in the US. And Hitchens, very famously, aside from being a very ardent and strident atheist, was also a supporter of what's called the October Surprise Thesis. And the October Surprise Thesis was a conspiracy theory that claimed that Ronald Reagan became president of the United States of America, not because he campaigned particularly well, but because he organized behind the scenes with Iran to delay the release of hostages in the Jimmy Carter administration, thus making Jimmy Carter look very inadequate on foreign policy and thus bolstering Reagan's poll ratings and thus allowed the hostages to be freed only once he became president. This is a conspiracy theory about how Reagan became president. It's not a mainstream view. Not many historians or political scientists actually believe this is the right explanation for the phenomena, but Hitchens was convinced that based upon the evidence, this was the best explanation of the event at hand. And he was willing to be called a conspiracy theorist by saying, look, if believing this particular conspiracy theory, even though I think it's true, makes me a conspiracy theorist, then I am a conspiracy theorist. He was willing to bite the bullet and say, look, I believe a conspiracy theory, thus I'm a conspiracy theorist. It just turns out I think the conspiracy theory is actually well evidenced by the arguments that's been put in support of it. Now, Aotearoa has its own crop of bespoke conspiracy theorists. This is Ian Wishart. Ian Wishart publishes the magazine Investigate, which these days looks like it belongs in the 1950s. Investigate now comes as a flip magazine. For those of you who only read things online, you won't know what a flip magazine is. It's a magazine with two covers, so you can turn it around. And so you have Investigate Him, which is about political analyses, boats, fishing, and conspiracy theories about financial inadequacies in the current government, and also what the gays and lesbians are up to in the background of New Zealand. And then you flip it around and you Investigate Her, which is about wedding dresses, bridal showers, baby care, and conspiracy theories about liberals trying to pervert the youth by introducing things like sex education and the like. So Wishart has created a magazine which looks after both the male from the 1950s and the female from the 1950s. It's actually really quite bizarre. And then you've got John Ansell. John Ansell is a PR campaigner. He's worked for National, Labour and ACT, and he's currently running a conspiracy theory that claims that actually Maori are the truly privileged people in Aotearoa. They have more rights than anyone else, and this is a vast conspiracy to make Pākehā feel guilty and thus give even more power to Maori, which is a really astounding conspiracy theory when you think about it, because not only are Maori getting all the power, according to John Ansell, they're still at the bottom of all the socio-economic stats. So obviously there's a massive cover-up to hide the real wealth that Maori have, and this is the theory that John Ansell has been touting now for about 3 or 4 years. I think he started his conspiracy theory and his campaigning before the last general election. Jonathan Eisen, he is the publisher of Uncensored magazine. Uncensored magazine is the conspiracy theory magazine for people who don't have the internet yet. And that Uncensored magazine is a collection of web pages which have been printed out with the hyperlinks still in blue. So you can get the magazine, open it up, and there'll be a web link right in front of you, and because you're so used to using a tablet, you go to press it, and then the page does nothing apart from crumple underneath your hand. It's really quite bizarre. So if you don't have the internet, read Uncensored magazine. Actually, no, if you don't have the internet, don't read Uncensored magazine. It really isn't worth your time. Brian Leland. Brian Leland is a member of the New Zealand Climate Science Coalition, which is an organisation which, it sounds quite innocuous. It's an organisation of climate science deniers who are trying to claim that NIWA, the government, and the UN are engaged in a large left-wing conspiracy to make us think that climate change is actually occurring when it's not. So they're alleging a massive conspiracy by world governments and the United Nations. And then finally, this guy. This is Vinny Eastwood. He is our most successful conspiracy theorist. Vinny holds a 2-hour internet radio show every working weekday, which is syndicated widely in the US, and thus he gets enough money from that syndication and donations into the show to support his lifestyle. He is a successful conspiracy theorist. His job is to disseminate conspiracy theories on the airways. And there are points in time where I look at him with envious eyes, going that he's actually managed to make money out of being a conspiracy theorist, whilst I'm now training to be a primary school teacher, because there's virtually no money to be made out of an academic analysis of these things. But that's just me having a little gripe, and we shall move on. Now, the point of this lecture is, we are all, if not critical thinkers, aspirant critical thinkers. We are all people who want to work out how to think critically about anything that we encounter in the public sphere. And part of that is analysing theories about conspiracies. So, if you hear a conspiracy theory, your first thought should be, should I believe this? Now, you've got 2 options there. You can either say, look, there's an argument that says that conspiracy theories are just by default irrational to believe. And so when I hear a conspiracy theory, that's a good reason to go, no, that's probably going to be absolute crap. Or you can go, well, I hear a conspiracy theory, do you have an argument for your particular claim of conspiracy? Because I need to evaluate your arguments. You can't simply say they're conspiring. You've also got to say something about they're conspiring because, and provide some argument that says, hey, this is why they're conspiring, this is my evidence. So you've got 2 options, basically. Dismiss them out of hand as being wacky or irrational, or go, well, sometimes we've got to think, maybe actually they're going to turn out to be true, or at least worthy of consideration. And I think our goal should be the latter. Because the whole point of a course like this is that we should never dismiss an argument just because it belongs to a particular class of thing. What we should be doing is going, look, if someone argues for a position, whether it's a conspiracy theory or not, we should evaluate it on its own merits. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to go through and show to you how you can evaluate conspiracy theories on their own merits and why that's a good thing. So let's now look at a definition of what a conspiracy theory is. The definition I'm going to use here is quite simple. A conspiracy theory is an explanation to cite a conspiracy as a salient cause of some event. So all a conspiracy theory is a theory about a conspiracy, whereby if the theory is true, then we know a conspiracy has occurred and it explains some event within the world. So this is, to a certain extent, a non-standard definition. Nothing about this definition says anything about whether conspiracy theories are irrational to believe or not. It simply says, look, it's a theory about a conspiracy. But I think we should use this general definition because it's the most useful one for analysing whether our suspicion of conspiracy theories in general is good or bad. And it's particularly important because we should be distinguishing between belief in conspiracy theories, believing conspiracy theory is true or false, and this thing which is known as conspiracism. Conspiracism is the thesis that says, look, there are people out there who believe conspiracy theories for no good reason. So either they're irrational, or they have some psychological delusion, or they have certain assumptions which turn out, when you think about them, not to be particularly true, i.e. they believe conspiracies occur more often than they actually do. And conspiracists, people who are subject to conspiracism, they are clearly irrational, when they simply believe a conspiracy theory because it's a conspiracy theory and with no supporting argument. But we have a question up the back.
Yeah, hey man.
Hello Justin, how are you? Nice beard.
Thank you. Yeah, it's coming along.
Very Jesus-like.
Yeah, I get that a lot. I thought it was maybe worth pointing out here that some people who are conspiracists, right, that doesn't mean out of hand, right, that there's going to be something like terribly psychologically deviant about this, right? This happens to normal people all the time who come under the grips of conspiracy theories.
Yeah, so Justin's point here is that just because someone is a conspiracist doesn't mean they're necessarily mad or irrational. That's the point? Yeah.
Not very good critical thinkers.
Yeah, so they may have certain assumptions which when you test them just turn out to be faulty. So no, I'm not saying that conspiracism means you're necessarily mad. What I'm saying is that if you are a conspiracist, that tells you nothing about whether belief in conspiracy theories is in fact irrational. Because whilst every conspiracist will turn out to be a conspiracy theorist, not every conspiracy theorist is a conspiracist. If you can find an example of a conspiracy theorist whose conspiracy theory is predicated on an argument with supporting evidence, you can't just dismiss them because there exists some irrational conspiracy theorists out there or some conspiracy theorists with wacky views about things. That would be a fallacious move. And so we need to distinguish between conspiracism and belief in conspiracy theories because it's important to note that sometimes people can put forward really good arguments in support of a conspiracy theory. And it would be weird to dismiss them because you can point at someone like David Icke or Alex Jones or Glenn Beck or Ian Wishart who believe any conspiracy theory you put forward and say, well, look, that's the kind of thing they would believe. And they're clearly irrational. So you must be irrational as well. That's a bad analogy. Yes, Justin?
And this is because conspiracies do sometimes actually happen, right?
Yes, as we are going to see, conspiracies do occur. You're preempting me, sir.
Oh, my apologies.
It's all right. It's always good to be reminded of one's own genius. I have a bit of an ego, you say. So, to get to that point, to show that conspiracies do actually occur, and strange beeps occur from time to time in the room, it's probably the NSA or the pork board just listening in on what's going on here. Let's just say a little bit about what a conspiracy theory constitutes of. Any claim about a conspiracy is going to rely on three things. You have to say there exists a group of people who engage in some kind of activity. So no one conspires alone. People always conspire with other people. That's what we sometimes call them co-conspirators. And they need to intend some end. So basically, they have to have an end game in mind, although as we'll see later on, they don't necessarily have to actually achieve it. They simply have to want to do it. And of course, they've got to act in secret. So the whole thing about being conspiratorial is like when you organize a surprise party, you don't tell the person who you're organising a surprise party, you're organising them a surprise party. Otherwise, it's not much of a surprise. We'll get back to surprise parties at the end. Now, of course, only some conspiracy theories turn out to be plausible. But that's not surprising, because actually, there are lots of explanations in the world that people put forward all the time, and only some of them turn out to be plausible. I can give you all sorts of wacky explanations as to why you aren't floating around the room at this particular point in time. I could tell you you're not floating around the room at this particular point in time because you're all wearing invisible weights which are anchoring you to the floor. Or actually there are invisible elephants sitting on top of every one of your head, which is forcing you from flying away. These are potential explanations as to why you are seated at this time and not bumping into each other like a sort of crazy mess. But of course, we happen to know the best explanation of this is going to be some theory which invokes a force called gravity. So there are lots of explanations out there, only some of which are plausible, i.e. only some of which are actually warranted by the available evidence. So it's not surprising that there are lots of conspiracy theories out there that turn out to be implausible. There are lots of any kinds of theories out there that turn out to be implausible. And we don't dismiss other fields of study because they also have some implausible theories. We dismiss them. We dismiss those individual theories, not the fields, for the sheer fact that they are either supported by the evidence or they're not. And when they're not supported by the evidence, that's a good reason to go, no, not going to pay attention to that, come back when you've got an argument which changes my mind. Now, of course, a worry that people have is that not only are there lots of conspiracies out there, but conspiracy theories out there, but routinely, conspiracy theories turn out to be the least likely explanation. So we might call this the just so fallacy, named after Rudyard Kipling's Just So stories. This is the argument that, look, in Rudyard Kipling's Just So stories, he provides you with some interesting explanations as to say how the leopard gets its spots. But it's just a story which, if it were true, would explain how the event came about. But it's actually not true. We know how the leopard got its spots. There's a complex evolutionary story here about camouflage, and also, it turns out, being able to avoid ticks and mosquitoes. So that's actually the best explanation. And Rudyard Kipling's story is simply an explanation which, if it were true, would explain how the leopard got its spots, but it invokes magical finger paint, and we just don't think those things occur. And so you might say the just so fallacy is an example of where an inference to the best explanation goes right, or say you're not inferring to the best explanation at all. Because when we try to work out what a good explanation is, what we're doing is we're going, look, we know some event has occurred, there are a whole bunch of different theories which would account for why the event occurred, and it turns out that one theory is just more likely to be true than another. But when these things go wrong, it's because we either fail to consider all of the available theories that there are. So we only pay attention to one or two, and we neglect the fact there are a few more over here, which turns out if we added them to our pool of available theories, would actually change our opinion as to which one's most likely. Or we make a bad judgment about which is the most likely hypothesis. So sometimes we have certain assumptions that make us jump towards conclusions, when actually a more considered approach would mean that we would think about things in a more considered way. We go back to the discussion at the beginning of the lecture of what was happening with the dirty politics scandal in New Zealand politics. A lot of people made their minds up about whether the dirty politics scandal was big or not because they read the book or analysed the media commentary, but because they either supported National or Labour. So they were, look, I'm a National Party supporter. These are obviously lies about the National Party. Ipso facto, it's a left-wing smear campaign. Nothing more needs to be said. The Mike Hoskins approach. I'm a Labour Party supporter. Obviously, everything Nicky Hager has said is true. Therefore, National is corrupt, which is the Bomber Bradley approach. And what you might be going is, well, hold on. That's a gut reaction based upon assumptions there. That's not a reaction based upon looking at the evidence in support or against the particular claims in dirty politics. So sometimes we jump to conclusions because of our preconceived notions or assumptions operating in the background. But There are lots of examples where actually this kind of analysis, that conspiracy theories routinely fail to be good explanations, just doesn't quite wash. For example, no matter what you think about the events of September 11th, 2001, you are a conspiracy theorist. So, if you believe that the Twin Towers and the attack in Washington, D.C. and the attempted attack on the White House were undertaken by an organization known as Al-Qaeda, being led by the terrorist mastermind Osama bin Laden, you believe in a conspiracy theory. The terrorist activity that occurred on September the 11th, 2001 fits a conspiracy. It was a bunch of hijackers operating in secret with an end goal. The end goal was either variously destroying the Twin Towers, the Pentagon, and the White House, or, possibly more plausibly, making an attack on mainland America, showing that Americans were not immune to the kind of things that Al-Qaeda felt America was doing overseas. This is a conspiracy because it fits all the hallmarks of people acting conspiratorially. It just happens to be the well-accepted explanation of the event. You could say the conspiracy theory here has a veneer of officialness. It's supported by world government, and you might say it's also supported by academic analysis. It's a conspiracy theory. It just happens to be one that most people think is warranted. Of course, you might also think that the events of 9/11 were a conspiracy theory in the other sense. You might go, look, the story you've just told, Matthew, is a packet of lies. The real story about what happened on September the 11th, 2001, is that elements within the American establishment, possibly including George W. Bush and Dick Cheney, conspired with other elements of the militarized forces in the US to blow up the Twin Towers via controlled demolition and fake an attack upon the Pentagon, such that they could then bring in new civil liberty legislation to crack down on civil liberties in the US, and also justify a war overseas. Now that's a conspiracy theory. That's saying that actually the real cause of the event was an elaborate conspiracy by members of the American government who simply blamed an organization known as Al-Qaeda. And there's a whole raft of intermediate options, all of which are conspiracy theories as well. Sometimes, when you're looking at explanations for events, it's not a choice between a conspiracy theory and a non-conspiracy theory, where you might go, well, look, conspiracies are a bit unlikely, so ipso facto, it's more likely to be the non-conspiratorial hypothesis. In this particular case, your choice is between one theory about a conspiracy and another. And in that situation, to work out what the best explanation is, you have got to judge each conspiracy theory on its merits and say which one is supported by the evidence, what arguments are there that shows that this particular conspiracy theory is more or less likely than the rival conspiracy theory. Because as I say, no matter what you believe about 9/11, you believe a conspiracy theory. The kind of event that 9/11 was, a surprise attack on New York and the Pentagon, has the hallmarks of being conspiratorial. So, you are a conspiracy theorist about 9/11 no matter what you believe. Now, of course, some people will object at this point, and they'll go, well, hold on, Matthew, slow down. When we talk about conspiracy theories versus official theories, we say, look, the 9/11 story about Al-Qaeda being responsible for the attacks on New York is official in a special sense. It's been endorsed by the right kinds of agencies. The US government supports the official theory, and US academic forces support the official theory. So it's not we simply go, it's one conspiracy theory versus another, where one of the conspiracy theories happens to be labelled official. The officialness really means something. And when you've got that contrast, you can say, look, a conspiracy theory is something which is non-official, and the official theory is something which we've got a really good reason for believing. Now, so this is the claim, official theories have been endorsed by institutions, and because they've been endorsed, that's a good reason for accepting them. Can someone think of a rationale as to why we might reject this particular claim about official theories? Yes?
Because of the events with Snowden and the government saying that it
Okay, so this is a nice contemporary example. Due to the NSA leaks with Edward Snowden and arguably also the leaks from WikiLeaks and the like, we now know that influential institutions sometimes lie to their populaces about what they're up to. So you might go, well, look, in official theory, you need to ask whether they're being sincere in their endorsement, and also you might want to ask, is their expertise actually relevant to the discussion at hand? Because from time to time, people in positions of authority lie. I know it's shocking, but they do. And sometimes the people in positions of authority who are lying are people who are the subject of very conspiracy theories you're trying to have an argument about. Now, you'll all recall what counts as a legitimate appeal to authority, so we're focusing here on the third condition, is the expert actually testifying honestly? And the worry that many conspiracy theorists have is that many of these theories being put forward by officialdom are actually examples of theories officialdom do not want you to believe. And if they don't want you to believe it, maybe they're in on the conspiracy. And there's actually a quite nice example of this from the annals of Russian history. Now, I'm going to assume that many of you aren't particularly au fait with 1930s Russian political history, so here's a potted history of the 1930s. In the 1930s, Joseph Stalin was leader of the USSR, and he was suffering from a slight amount of paranoia at the time, given he was murdering millions of people per year. He was particularly concerned that his former ally Leon Trotsky, who was now living in exile as an enemy, was fomenting a revolt against Stalin. So Stalin sent off his secret agents to basically find out what Trotsky was up to. They came back to him and said, look, there's no evidence Trotsky is actually fomenting a revolt against you. It's fine. He's only operating outside of Russia. He thinks Russia's a failed experiment for communism. And Stalin's response was, look, I told you to find evidence that Trotsky is conspiring against me. You haven't found that evidence, go and make some up. So over 9 months, the secret police abducted and psychologically and sometimes physically tortured a whole bunch of Trotsky's former friends and got them in court to perjure themselves and claim there was a massive conspiracy by Trotsky to return to Russia to take control. The people who testified to the conspiracy that they were involved in, allegedly, were then executed, and an execution warrant for Trotsky was then issued, leading eventually to his death outside Frida Kahlo's house in Cuba with an ice pick through his head. Now, what was interesting about this was that at the very time that this particular hypothesis was put forward, that there was a large-scale conspiracy by Trotsky to take over Russia, people in the US and the UK got interested because they were a little bit suspicious about these particular claims. According to trial data, Trotsky was in 2 places at once, so often he was in London and Vienna on the same day having meetings, and that just turned out to be slightly impossible in 1930s Europe. And Trotsky's son, who died in 1932, ended up having meetings with people in 1933 and 34, which is quite difficult to do when you're dead. And so the Dewey Commission, led by John Dewey, a famous American philosopher, basically put forward a theory that says, look, the conspiracy theory, the verdicts being put forward by Moscow about these trials are the result of an elaborate conspiracy. It's all part of the plot. They're trying to prove that Trotsky is a menace when he's not. And the US and UK government said, well, that's interesting. We should probably find out more about this, because it turns out one of our allies is actually, acting in a non-democratic fashion. That would be terrible. So they rang up the Kremlin, and they asked to speak with Stalin, and Stalin said, no, this is disinformation. This is disinformation being put forward by enemies of Russia, and it's just a vile conspiracy theory, believe nothing. And the US and the UK accepted the assurance of the Russian government and went, no, the Dewey Commission's wrong. In 1956, when Stalin died, his successor, Nikita Khrushchev, one of the conspirators behind the Moscow trials, actually came out and said, look, turns out actually it was a large-scale conspiracy. Stalin really hated Trotsky. He wanted evidence of Trotsky's malfeasance. We couldn't find it, so we manufactured an excuse for a whole bunch of innocent people to keep Stalin happy. Sorry, that was a bad thing for us to do. Can we be forgiven now? Turns out the Dewey Commission was right. Turns out the Russian government had conspired against the people, not just of Russia, but also by extension lying to the governments of the US and the UK, and actually it was a large-scale conspiracy. The Dewey Commission was right. The real conspiracy and the disinformation was the stuff that was being put forward by Russia at that time. And this is not an isolated event. If you go through the history of the 20th century, there are lots of examples of governments engaging in conspiratorial utterances or engaging in conspiracies to hide what they've really done. We've got another nice example to look at when you go home. The Gulf of Tonkin incident in US military history is a great example of the US claiming that they were attacked when actually they were the attackers and using that as a pretext for war. And then denying that the truth of the event for about a decade until such time they were caught in a web of lies and then managed to somehow get out of it by apologizing well after the war they were fighting had gone away. Now, this all sounds rather doom and gloomy. Here I am talking about why we should believe certain claims of conspiracy, but there is a caveat here. Just because you can show that a conspiracy occurs, that doesn't, to any large extent, show you that the conspiracy explains some of it. I promise I'd go back to surprise parties, and this is me doing it. Imagine you're organising a surprise party for a friend. And as part of that organisation, you and your friends decide to get together on Friday night and orchestrate when the party is going to be next week. And you get together and go, look, we should really organise a surprise party for Jeff. And you go, well, yeah, but first of all, we've got this really cool board game I've just bought, so let's play that for a few hours, and then we'll get down to the nitty-gritty of organising the party. And you play the board game for 6 hours, you're absolutely tired, you go, look, we'll organise the party tomorrow on Facebook, it'll be fine. And then tomorrow comes and no one gets around to going onto Facebook. And then a week later, you suddenly go, damn, Jeff's birthday was yesterday, and we didn't actually do anything about that party. Now, on one level, you conspired. You got together as a group for some end, operating in secret, to give Jeff the best surprise party you could possibly give. It just turns out you never actually got round to actually holding the party. You were conspiring, you had an intended end, you operated in secret, you were working together, you just didn't actually do anything about it. So, for a conspiracy theory to be good, you have to be able to show there exists a conspiracy, which means you have to show there exist plotters operating in secret, acting towards some end, and you've got to show they did something which explains some event within the world. And maybe that's our worry about conspiracy theories. Because we can point to all sorts of examples of claims of conspiracy. But we can also point to examples where conspiracies go awry or people don't achieve anything of any particular note. But note, if this is going to be our reason for rejecting claims of conspiracy, and the conspiracy theories that they come from, then we're analysing arguments for or against the claim of conspiracy. We're engaging in analysis by going, well, look, you've made a claim that there exists a conspiracy, but even if I accept the conspiracy occurred, it doesn't explain this thing over here. Or you're going, well, look, even if I accept that there exists a conspiracy, it doesn't really explain things in the right way. Yes, there was a conspiracy, but they didn't actually achieve the event because some other force came into the event. So as my final example, think about 9/11 again. Many of the conspiracy theorists from the inside job or truther hypothesis angle, the people who claim that the true explanation of what happened in 9/11 was actually the American government committing the act and not Al-Qaeda, will point to as evidence documents, actual real documents, where people like Dick Cheney and his acolytes say, wouldn't it be great if America was attacked by an outside force? This would legitimize our new American century hypothesis of building military bases overseas to protect us from further attacks. And people go, look, isn't it convenient that Dick Cheney, a senior cabinet member in the American government, who wanted a terrorist attack, got one on his watch? Surely that's evidence that he was conspiring to bring this about, and that gives us reason to believe that 9/11 was an inside job. But nothing about this story tells you that it's also quite possible that Dick Cheney was going, look, I really wish there's a terrorist attack, because America is the kind of nation that's bound to be attacked by terrorists eventually, and the sooner it happens, the sooner we can do something about it, because public sympathy wouldn't be with us for these invasions otherwise, and did nothing, and the attack that he thought was going to occur actually did. So there's no need to then go, Dick Cheney conspired. You're simply going, well, look, this is what he wanted to occur, and quite conveniently, it actually did. So, in summation, because we're about to run out of time, if you want to say a conspiracy exists, you need to be able to show there exist plotters who attended some end and operated for a time in secret, and from that you then have to engage in an argument which shows that there existed a conspiracy, and the existence of that conspiracy explains in just the right way the kind of event you're trying to explain. So if you want to say a conspiracy theory is warranted, you've got to show there existed a conspiracy and it explains things in the right way. And if you want to dismiss a conspiracy theory, you've got to either show that there was no conspiracy, which means you have to analyze an argument for the pros and cons, or you've got to say that even if there was a conspiracy, the conspiracy theory is not as good an explanation as some other rival hypothesis, and that requires putting forward an argument as well, which is, of course, the 105 message. If someone puts forward an argument, you've got to analyze it. And if you want to put forward an extraordinary claim like a conspiracy theory, you better damn well argue for it. And that, as they say, is that. Have a good rest of the day.